The latest on that toxic blue-green algae clogging so many southwest Florida canals, especially in Cape Coral. A North Fort Myers man says he's created this device that he claims is able to keep the algae from building up and then rotting in his backyard canal. The idea is to keep the water moving and circulating so it doesn't give a chance for the algae to build up and turn blue-green. Hi there, I'm Patrick Nolan. We got a lot going on at this hour. 400 Corner Sam Sosa is showing you how this device works.
Gary Cicluna says his homemade aerator makes the smell in his backyard tolerable by breaking up these giant chunks of decaying algae.
It gets caught back here and there's no water movement whatsoever is when it really starts to breed and just gets thick and really starts to stink.
The retired hydraulic engineer lives at the end of a canal in North Fort Myers. He made this device to create some movement in the stagnant water.
So with the idea of being able to agitate the water so that it can't sit still and keep growing, that to keep it broken up, that it would make a big difference.
It works by recycling water underneath the surface and pumping it through these tubes.
Basically took a waste pump or a sub pump, hooked it to a 2-inch piece of PVC, made 3 nozzles so I could control the nozzles and the flow. Pump has a little motor. It produces 3,300 gallons an hour.
He says over the last week and a half, it kept algae from building up and turning this blue color. He turned it off 2 days ago and it's built up again. So he believes it's working.
Experimenting like this gentleman is doing is a good thing.
I showed the device to Dr. James Douglas, marine scientist at FGCU. He says it doesn't appear harmful and may help short term.
It may clear the thick algae away from the immediate area that the device is being used. I don't expect it to permanently get rid of the algae or kill the algae.
Gary doesn't see this as a long-term fix either, but says his neighbors are already asking about getting their own installed for a bit of relief.
If we can do any little bit to try to keep it from getting any worse, I think we need to give it a try and come together as a community and do what we can to help.
So this is not the first homemade device we've seen that someone says, all right, this can do the thing with the algae. So Sam's back in the studio, out of the field with us to go over some of these devices. And even when I was at this Captains for Clean Water event at Millennial Bruin, people were coming up to me with their business cards. I got the thing. So we've come up with some criteria to kind of make it easy for you.
Right. You know, this isn't even the first time I interviewed Gary. Previously, he was working on a skimmer type device to attach to his boat to skim some of that algae and drag it out into the water. Now, this solution does work short term, but it won't last. FWC says there aren't any legal problems with doing this either. Another solution we saw last week, people who live in Cape Coral made a makeshift algae boom. It was really cool. You see the picture right there. It had netting that went all the way to the bottom. It was weighed down with weights, and that was to prevent algae from flowing into their waterway, right? Well, that worked pretty well, actually, and it's not a long-term solution either, but like I said, it did work pretty well at the time. This isn't exactly legal because it does restrict boat travel, but police kind of let it slide because they said with the state of emergency, people were trying different things, so you'll be okay if you do that. The next thing we saw...
I just want to say real quick about that one. That one brought such interest. Our sister station in Tampa, I don't know if you remember, but they asked us to share the story with them because people in the Tampa Bay area were intrigued with that boom one. So even though some of these aren't meeting the criteria you're laying out, people are still desperate for answers.
I'm telling you, some of these are so cool. That one in particular really caught my eye because it really seemed to work. So then, of course, the city is doing their own cleanup. That's with some pumps and some vacuums. That does bring some temporary relief, but again, with the tidal flows, the algae is going to come back. So that isn't a permanent solution either. Of course, it is legal for them to do that. Finally, let's talk about Gary's invention that we just saw in our story. That one did clear out the algae pretty well. It seemed to work, and it didn't stop algae from coming in per se, but it stopped it from building up and rotting, and that's when you really get that smell. So that's what he was going for there, and it did work for him. Again, that's not a permanent solution. I checked with FWC, and they say that that's not illegal for him to have. It's on his property. It was literally on his dock. So that's fine for him to say. So all of these, you can see, none of them will last. I think that's a common theme here.
And the other thing is, none of them seem large scale enough when we're talking about canal after hundreds of miles of canals at some point here to really, I mean, it might do a few canals or somebody's backyard, but the grand scale of the problem.
Right. These are really localized solutions that people are just installing in their backyard to get rid of that smell, really. That's what people really seem to be concerned about.
Blame them.
Yeah, so like you see, none of these will last. I did talk to our scientist at FGCU, Dr. James Douglas, to explain why.
Lake Okeechobee is still full of algae, and Lake Okeechobee is still being released into the Caloosahatchee, so the algae is being replenished all the time, and there's also a source of nutrients for the algae to feed on that's not going away. So these solutions are really temporary at best until we cut off the supply of nutrients for the algae.
Of course, there are some long ongoing projects addressing the flow from Lake Okeechobee to send water south rather than over to our way. Those projects completion dates are years away, though. I'm live in the studio. Sam Sosa, Fox 4, in your corner.